and welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. If you listened to our last episode of 2023, which was our year-end tech briefing, perhaps the biggest takeaway was that although there may have been quite a buzz in the Caribbean tech space, there didn't seem to be any meaningful development, nothing that really seemed to move the needle in a meaningful way. However, that does not mean that innovation that is currently occurring and that can have an impact is not taking place. In this, our first episode of 2024, we'll be exploring impact innovation and deep tech, the relationship between the two, and of course, examining them from a Caribbean perspective. And to help us to do so, we're delighted to have back with us once again, Telly Valerie Onu, Telly, digital economist, global strategist, and management and development specialist, who is also the head of Quintessence Consulting Inc., the founder of Valerie Capital, and the head of governance and execution of the Bantu Blockchain Foundation, which are just a few of the hats she wears. Telly, welcome back and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you, Michelle, for having me here.
Fantastic. Thanks again for joining us. It's always wonderful to chat with you. I learned so much, and I'm sure that our audience as well really look forward to hearing from you. And Telly, just to start us off and ensure that we're all on the same page, let's perhaps define a few terms. When people talk about deep tech, convergence economics, impact innovation, what do they mean?
Okay, so there are a number of things going on there, a number of different backgrounds. So when we're talking about deep tech, convergence, impact innovation, it's a number of different things. And I think I would break it down step by step. So you've heard of fintech, which is really financial technology. And to be more specific, it's more financial technologies that address user experiences and improve user experiences. So deep tech really refers to a number of different cutting-edge technologies that are really deeply rooted in science and technology and engineering. They're normally focused around innovations that really tackle problems. So number one, it's rooted in science and engineering. Number two, they foster innovations that solve complex problems. And I think this is really the key thing, complex problems. For the most part, if you notice, you can have a fintech that's just addressing maybe how you pay something, and it might not necessarily be life-changing. But when you start thinking about pain points that are so severe and so challenging, like legacy infrastructure issues, this is where you need new type of technologies that actually transform and help solve those problems. So that's why it's called deep tech. Convergence economics. So we are seeing, obviously, different types of technologies coming together and being combined to deliver value. So what does this mean? This means, you talk about fintech, and it's you might see in a particular application fintech being applied. Now you have other deep tech technologies such as AI. I'm sure everyone knows AI by now. AI took the storm last year, and it's game changing. You have even in the health field, biotechnology is actually being developed. So you have this CRISPR technology where they do gene editing. All these technologies, deep tech technologies, AI, blockchain, machine learning, biotech, all form part of deep tech, but they all start to converge together. Because as you know, when you're delivering and implementing to solve a complex problem, not one technology is not going to do everything. Maybe 3 years ago, people thought, fintech is going to drastically transform everything. It is making significant changes, but it's solving only one piece or one small area. It doesn't really address the whole ecosystem challenges. So sometimes you need to apply many different technologies to converge in order to deliver value. Hence why the term convergence economics. So all these technologies merge and they're creating new opportunities that never really existed before, which comes to the last theme, impact innovation. So we have obviously innovation is obviously something we do different. It's applied creativity in order to solve a particular challenge. And impact innovation really is about creating solutions that not only drive your financial success, but also create a positive impact for society and the environment. And in the space of, in the face of climate change, and, you hear about sustainability, the fact that we have to be more sustainable minded. We probably hear in other circles people talk about ESG, environment, social, and governance. All these movements are all about unlocking impact. We are in a society, and we have created, unfortunately, a lot of man-made crises. So impact recognizes that part and parcel of solving a problem, when you are an innovator, is also it should benefit your society, benefit certain vulnerable groups within the society, be it gender, youth, people who are differently able. What impact is your innovation actually delivering? So when you do combine deep tech, the fact that they're all converging, and impact innovation, it is actually unlocking a whole movement towards sustainability, regenerative living, and, us becoming more resilient on a whole.
Yes, Telly, thanks for that. But it also has to raise quite a number of questions for me, because, here in the Caribbean, we often tend to be thinking, are we outside of the bubble of deep tech and impact innovation and all of what you're talking about? We tend to think about technology often very discreetly. And so seeing this sort of bigger system and, synthesizing all of these various disciplines to help us to solve real problems, it's not something that I think that we have been doing or have been doing successfully generally across the region. But then I was also thinking too, granted that I'm not as deep in the tech entrepreneurship space as others, but just from my cursory observation, we almost seem to see innovation, but startups operating in two tranches. Either they are very much about, I sort of think of it almost like Silicon Valley. So, they really want to have these sort of big, ventures that probably they will be able to become a unicorn or that sort of thing. But then you also have the others where that might be more social enterprise driven. They're trying to solve problems, but then they may not necessarily be getting the kind of visibility and attention that, our would be, I guess major innovators and those who want to be seen as some of the exemplars of Silicon Valley are. They want to become that, but then you have those that might be trying to solve societal problems, but they may not necessarily be getting access to funding. They don't have the reach and the visibility that we still seem to put on probably the sort of big ticket ventures of that we probably are still trying to emulate.
Yeah, you're right, because impact, if we're looking at it from the entrepreneurship space, impact innovators generally, as I said, focus on positive social environmental impacts alongside financial returns. But for them, it's not really a growth perspective, because people who go after that type of Silicon Valley venture, pure venture capital, the venture capitalist is taking risks, right? Big risks, and there's a cost to that capital. So that venture capital, in order to kind of win on their risk, it's like they're placing bets, and in a pool of startups they would invest in, maybe one would return maybe 50 times or 100 times the investment. It's really big. They're looking for big returns. And so they place a lot of bets. So now you have the dilemma, the societal dilemma, where we have all these challenges that are actually changing our entire landscape and putting risk into very capital that they're trying to save. I mean, last year, how many banks went down? And how many of those Silicon Valley banks went down because of all this type of concentrated risk? So it's not sustainable. So unfortunately, while their methodology is really purely financial return, and sometimes even if a model is not developed, they throw money at it so that you can get there. You know, it's a method where you don't have to prove that your model and you have product market fit. You still get finance because hopefully with more funding, you will eventually get there in order to get the return. So while it's important for patient capital, the way that is done is definitely in conflict with impact innovation. However, there is a growing movement of impact innovation investors or impact investors, because people definitely realize that you can still generate financial return while you are also unlocking impact. But this does require more innovation in the business model. So what we're seeing with impact innovation is actually, should I say, reinvigorating old models and innovating on those older traditional models so that it unlocks new ways of us actually being sustainable and financing. And it's possible. It just means you have to look at it from different lens. For example, let's look at people who are maybe poor, they're unemployed. You have to look at it from the lens of who is paying, because they might not be your end customer. But if you can target, say, other larger firms that probably have a corporate social responsibility component to what they're doing, that actually have funds to give back, maybe those can pay, or they can create some kind of sponsorship. So it is a challenge, and in a space and in a region where we already have challenges to access to finance. Our key is really targeting impact investors and a lot of VCs. They're now VC style impact, investors in the space that look at other ways of doing things. For example, in agriculture. Agriculture is one in our region we can all identify. Our financial system see them as extremely high risk. And when we think about what they're faced now, apart from us not necessarily having organized agriculture, the fact that we suffer from economies of scale, you have a lot of small farmers, really small scale farmers, not looking at people who have 10 hectares. Some people don't even have up to 1 acre, but they're considered a farmer in our region. So because of all of that, we have a very fragmented, agriculture sector. You don't have it organized. So that also adds to challenges because you don't know who's planting what. On a broader perspective for a country, you can't even do production planning right because you don't have that information and that data. But here comes in AI, or let's start with IoT, Internet of Things and sensors, where you can literally put sensors in a farmer's farm while they're doing things, and it's collecting the data, because record keeping can be very onerous for a farmer. So if that's going into a database, now you have insights. You know when they plant, you know exactly what's going on with their soil and so on. So you can start to now predict things and better organize. Then you add in additional things, because in our space, they don't want to work together. Maybe in Africa, you can get a lot of, cooperatives working together or farmer groups. In our region, we have farmer groups, but it's very challenging because we don't trust one another. You need a trust technology. What is that technology? Blockchain, decentralized technology, where everyone can get their own wallet. When payments come in, it's automatically provided to them. So nobody needs to fight with the other to say the other person is undercutting me because you have put a streamlined system that just works. So provided it's implemented properly. So this is just a practical example of how bringing all these things together. So now when you have these organized systems, as an entrepreneur, it's very, and if you have a trust technology in place, you have that data coming in, it's very easy to monetize and very easy now for it to be profitable. Why do you think in the last year, towards the last quarter, all you're hearing in the region is AgTech, AgTech? We've had precision agriculture for years. Of course, people are much more aware now because of climate change and the move to climate smart technologies, but we're always 10 years behind. It's been there. And agriculture is profitable in other countries. Why can't it be profitable in our region? Because we're not using convergence economics to scale and optimize and create new models. So I hope that so it's not impossible. There are opportunities for sure to actually unlock the capital that even venture capitalists are looking for. Because venture capitalist behavior is it's like gambling, right? But impact investors are, should I say, more measured about it.
Yes. And the example you gave with agriculture, it's so profound because it is a widespread issue across the region. It is something we are all grappling with. But then you also see how blockchain in and of itself is not going to solve agriculture problems, right?
You solve the problem of organization and trust amongst the organization.
Yeah.
You other technologies and other solutions as well, training, capacity building, non-tech as well, for sure.
Indeed. I guess it's also just speaks to then now just the whole sort of ecosystem as it relates to this innovation in the region. I guess we kind of speak about the venture capital element and probably angel investors as well. And, having interviewed what I considered, innovative ventures, there was a year that I looked at, for example, social entrepreneurship. That's on the podcast, interviewing, various entities that have been either focusing on innovation, because I did a year of innovation as well as social entrepreneurship. And, one of the things that I found, and it's probably something that I'm going to pursue this year, is to probably go back to some of them and see how they are faring, because many of them may not have been doing work that might be considered deep tech. Some of them might be, if you really look at it. But for various reasons, I think many of them have not survived 4 years down the line. And I mean, besides perhaps we know the financial challenges, but where do you see any other sort of challenges that probably we might need to be addressing to help us probably to create the more enabling environment for deep tech and convergence economics and impact innovation I want to say thrive, but I'm even thinking that might even just be a little bit much to exist in the region.
Right. So yes, you hit the nail on the head. You have to create a supportive ecosystem for entrepreneurs on a whole to even thrive and survive. And yes, I do endorse you doing some checks in on older startups. When I did my last checks, a lot of them, according to Silicon Curry, Ingrid did an article a couple years ago, and a lot of them were Deadpool, which is, normal. I mean, startups have, when you look at the data, it tells you about 90% of businesses fail. But some of them are really good ideas that probably could have had a chance if the ecosystem was supportive. Supportive how? We understand the issues with finance, and we won't belabor the point. So access to finance hands down is a big issue. But even before the access to finance, you have to look at the readiness to access that finance. And I think this is where the support network is important in order to take that great idea from concept to reality. And even, I have to say it here, we use the term innovation rather loosely, and it's not applied. Innovation, we talk about, oh, the region needs to innovate, people need to innovate, but what is innovation? When you look at our ecosystem, let's look at research and development. Do we do research and development? Really? We don't. So how on earth can we innovate? Because it's the same process. It's an R&D process. You do your research, you create a hypothesis, you do your research, not just sitting behind a desk. You have to go out and test your hypothesis and come back and make changes. But we don't take any scientific approach to anything we're doing. So, of course, there are gaps, there are fundamental gaps in us taking the idea from concept to reality. And it's reflective of even the rest of our society. Every different sector you go to, the issue is we have an execution problem in the Caribbean. It's not that we lack people who are knowledgeable, we have the most PhDs and whatever. It's the fundamentals of execution, which are not anchored, unfortunately, in the educational system. It's about, do we have a design thinking framework and methodology that we use to approach these things? Do we all have a science background and methodology? Hence why STEM is very important. Science as really should be compulsory for everyone because it fosters that critical thinking. So if you have an absence of these type of competencies, naturally, we are going to have an absence of us being able to identify issues, because problem identification is poor and very weak, for us to even begin to start looking at how we can sequence things in order to implement and scale, you know. We know this thing high level. We might research at should I say academic perspective, but when it comes to the fundamentals, what are those fundamentals? How do we identify the core of the problem? How do you peel it? How do you get to the root cause? Peel it like an onion to see what it is. It's in that identification of needs can we then design products? And I said the word design because we talk about creative economy as a bubble. But for us to really innovate, we have to all become designers, right? This has to be mainstream. So if you're looking at policy, what sort of policies government need to do? This is part of the policy. Product design should be one of those, should I say, mandatory skills, like back in the day where you had to do maths and English. It's math, English, science. Now you have to put product design in there. Because if we become product designers, we can now change our orientation from being like product-led to market-oriented. When I am doing my consultancy, it's the same thing. Different industry, but same problems. We create something, we put a package together, and we push it to a person, and we wonder why there's no adoption. And it happens all the time. Look at even the CBDCs. Issue of lack of adoption. Why? Because the design, it wasn't designed for the stakeholders in mind. It was designed maybe for one stakeholder or two stakeholders, but not for the ecosystem. So we need to understand ecosystem design. So I think that will help us take the idea right into reality, for sure.
Boy, Telly, you're saying all the things that I want to hear. But at the same time, the fact that you're also confirming the theories that I myself and observations that I have had, it then makes me even more concerned that we don't seem to be learning and developing solutions that can help us to correct or remedy our current stance, because the issue of the CBDCs, I mean, we were talking before we started recording, and one of the things that I think has been a great concern to me is, as you say, the central bank, the government expect people to adopt this digital currency, trying to encourage people to adopt, but then the supports that are needed to make this currency valuable, a benefit to people, where they can say, what are the benefits to using, for example, here in Jamaica, Jamdex over cash, Jamdex over using my credit card. The value proposition for using the digital currencies in the region is not compelling enough as yet. And that seems to be, at least indicative, as you say, of a bigger problem. And you also just mentioned about being a consultant and probably even seeing the mindset of your clients. Oftentimes they just want a solution. And by the time they probably bring you in, they basically want you to rubber stamp what they have already done. And sometimes you now have to try and take them back and say, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Because they already have given you the specifications of what they want. And then you sometimes wonder, when you produce what they want, they find it useless, and your whatever you have recommended is sitting on a shelf. And oftentimes they have not identified the problem correctly. And I think that is such a powerful thing, but something that so many of us haven't realized and have not put systems in place to remedy that.
I agree with you, indeed. It's like, for example, I did a workshop in Barbados recently, and it was a design. I implemented a design thinking component. And what I found was, they were supposed to kind of identify the needs of the vulnerable groups in order to sort of design new insurance products, innovative products for them. And persons went to actually writing out the project document, and I'm like, but wait. Have you identified the needs? Oh, the people need this and that. I said, no, but then what you're identifying is something superficial. What's the driver behind it? What's the emotions? What is driving that? What is the shark bite? Because once you can address a shark bite, then you're actually solving a person's pain point. And that's one-on-one design, but it took a while for some of the people to kind of, this is a whole new thinking. So it made me think, like, okay, this is actually a whole new process of thinking for a lot of people, because they quickly come in to solve the problem. Yes, this is the problem, whatever. But the danger of doing that is you have now implemented, fantastic, great, but who's going to use it? Because it's probably a mosquito bite problem to the end population. So it's there. They have many alternatives. So it's one of those things I would say are key fundamentals that need to happen. The other fundamental is, and you can't underscore it, we're in a very different age, an age of convergence, an age of digital technology. And the only way we can actually work together is collaborate. So I find we don't have enough collaborative examples or collaborative models because, again, inherently in our ecosystem, it's been always a risk to share with some other person. But when you look at other ecosystems, especially in the startup space, it's all about collaboration, because the more you collaborate, the more you're building out your idea and you're getting more feedback. So collaboration and feedback is something that we don't necessarily do because we're kind of afraid someone's going to steal the idea and stuff like that. And even on a broader scale, you're finding now more and so, and if we're now looking back in tech, whether it's fintech or whatever, you do need collaborative approaches in order to implement and execute some of these things. The word ecosystem, you can have a model that really builds out the ecosystem. So we're not doing much in terms of even educating persons on how to design ecosystem models to even unlock different types of value. So we're stuck in, the 1900 management, and we haven't really pivoted to the new way of doing things. So there's a big, huge disconnect. And unfortunately, as I start again, no longer are we in a space where, oh, yes, it's about digital transformation. We need to move forward. You now have additional crises. You have the climate crisis, which impacts everything. It's very catastrophic. And guess what? This is another sticking point because we like to do everything we do tends to be in silos. So we're tackling climate action, climate finance in a silo, not realizing the way you implement is to leverage some of these technologies and techniques. It's not building off of it. So you find because the stakeholders who are generally participating in climate action might be environmentalists and, they're not in that space of tech. This is why you do need an ecosystem approach because they need data in order to make a case. Where's that data coming from? Holistically. Think about traditional, who gives you weather data? Your Met Service, your Met offices, right? But no one really thinks of them as now being more tech-oriented now, ICT, because that data needs to be driven by certain agencies. So you're finding even around the world, Met Services is evolving to add additional data points, hydrology, climatology, etc., and using all these ICT tools that, generally speaking, would not necessarily be categorized as the normal tech tools for everyday person. So I think it's the silos that are also preventing us. The silo thinking, not convergent thinking, is also preventing us from actually implementing and moving forward. And we don't want to wait until we have a disaster before we start doing things. By that time, it's too late.
Yes. You mentioned two things I want to touch on, the data issue and then going back to climate. So data, because I guess for anything that you want to do, if you're going to try to build any sort of robust model, properly identify a problem, you're going to need data. And I think here in the region, we still are, I don't know if are we data averse, or the fact that somehow we feel as if the data should just exist, right? We don't need to do anything, but the data should be there to help us to do our job. And if it's not there, then we will rely on anecdotal things. We'll go online, see what is there, see if we can sort of relate it to what we need. But the systems to create the data are not being put in place to generate the data. There's also too that there's a lot of data being generated. You spoke about the Met Office. Oftentimes also, let's say in agriculture, we have like agriculture extension offices. They're collecting a certain amount of data. A lot of for example, produce are being distributed in government supported cooperatives and so on. They have some sense of the produce for export, etc. So there is data in almost any field, sector, discipline in many of our countries, but it's all locked up. Oftentimes maybe still a pen and paper, or even if it's digitized, it is within a certain ministry, department, agency. And so you find that we're looking for data. The data may exist, it may not exist, but we don't realize that we need to put systems in place to generate the data that we need to make more informed decisions.
Yes, you're right in that. I would like to kind of highlight maybe some parity here.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about gender awareness and gender sensitivity and responsiveness. I think it's the same that applies to data. Are we data aware in the first place? For us, for some, because of how data has now become a new pillar, I think we have been focused on other peripheral things, the nice shiny things, the laptop computers, the phones. These are physical things. And I mean, when I say we, I can think of it from policymakers, They like to see tangibles. So we tend to focus on the hard assets and not necessarily now focus on the content, the information. And even when we're doing it, not doing it at a granular level. So what is happening? When you go to a meeting, they tell you, but we collect data. Yes, they're collecting it. But how is data being managed? This is where the cog needs to be fixed, right? Because you do need to set up proper data schematics and so on. And then there's the other reality is in our context, if you want to do things right the right way, where do we store this data? You know, do we have our own investments into server facilities, right? Or we have to always go and outsource it. So there's so many, fundamental things. But when you think about the pillars, there's so many things that have to be done in terms of really creating the mechanism so that when we need data, we can pull from it and codify it. So a lot of times we're collecting information, but we're collecting information like in a document. Like the other day, I was asking, people have an online form. There's launching a website with an online form, and I asked a key question. So where's that information going to go? Oh, yes, it'll be sent to an email, which is fine because we as humans need a readable format for that information that's being collected on the form. But if we need to now analyze it in the future, I asked the question, wouldn't it be useful to actually divide that data into variables so that when you have to do a search for a particular sector or so on, it can pull up the information? They said, it means it needs more coding. So again, we're not thinking about data at the granular level and putting in the things that need to be in place to manage data. So as you find, we have a lot of specialists who went to study computer science and so on, but we don't have enough data managers. And data science is a big field. It's an interdisciplinary discipline, and it's a huge area that we need to have more of. Data management as a key pillar. And unless we get to that point where you have your data manager who sits right up next to the CEO, at least creating that governance framework for data governance, we're always going to run into the problems. When you're talking about data governance policy, so if we're looking at governments, open data policy. Now, it's been slow. I do know some governments have to now pass other types of legislations like freedom of information and so on. It's happening slowly. But I think it's getting them aware and sensitized as to the value of this open data. Now that we understand that food security is so important for us, we've come through a pandemic. We saw what happened during the pandemic. So now we realize, okay, now agriculture is a big sector. No more lip service. We need to put in the supports in place. You recognize that AgTech would definitely help put support in place. But agriculture is so powerful because it's rich with data. How are we collecting this data? Because it's through those data you can actually unlock additional opportunities. Case in point, insurance. You have new insurance methods, innovations that are actually leveraging these type of data. So if you can have sensors collecting soil data, you're connecting data from your Met services on the weather, you can now have a more predictive pattern so that a farmer can actually have a crop policy, insurance policy for their crop, just in case a hurricane hits. And of course, all that data is there. Once it happens, they get paid under their policy. No more waiting for weeks and so on. So that recovery process, immediately after a disaster can happen quite quickly. So all of these things are connected, but you cannot unlock the opportunities unless that data can be free flowing and you can provide that. So I think more and more people are now recognizing raw data can be shared, okay, as long as you are adhering to certain privacy and data protection, meaning personally identifiable information is kept, away from that. But other data points are very important because here you can have startups that can now create new different services and solutions based on that data. And then you layer AI on that even more so because AI relies on data. It's when you have large amounts of data, can AI really and truly work in analyzing all these big data sets? But are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. Not in the region, at least,
Yeah. And just this whole issue of climate tech, because as you said, I think we look at climate as this I say environmental issue, but something for the environmentalists. You have certain policymakers that are agitating globally for us to probably, especially for developed countries, to pay greater attention and recognize the impact that their decisions are having on developing countries. But to share with us a little bit more, because I think even for us in the tech space, we don't really see climate as something that is within our, wheelhouse, probably outside of the sort of equipment and programming and those sorts of aspects. So share with us your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I think generally speaking, when addressing the whole climate issues, climate action, it's a very complex endeavor because it happens at different stages, different phases. There's a whole backstory as to how we got here. There's a whole science behind it about the temperature and the fact that there's global warming and we're trying to keep a temperature at a particular point. So yes, it does have a lot of risks for us, and especially us in living in the region. I mean, someone coughs overseas, we get impacted immediately, right? So in a nutshell, us, humanity, have destroyed the planet. We've destroyed our ecosystems. The industrial age produced a lot of smog and smoke and all these unhealthy things that have now warmed up the planet. Essentially, that's the beginning of the discourse. And, well, us in the region didn't necessarily have large factories or manufacturers, but in context, when you think about the Chinas, you think about the Americas, the UK, all these production processes have definitely damaged the planet. The fact that the planet's getting hotter, it's now changing our climate, and we're having stronger hurricanes, stronger this. Everything is just changing, and that's impacting us. So it's now a risk. So there are two factions or two thoughts. The first thought is, hey, listen, let's try and reduce the temperature. So, hence the word mitigate, climate mitigation as a strategy. We're trying to do whatever we need to do to reduce the temperature. So they recognize, just like anything else, you do need technologies. And when I mean technologies here, we're also talking about climate technologies, new techniques, new tools, new type of systems to help reduce those temperatures, the temperature of the planet, or the impact of damaging the planet warmer. So the goal is to try and keep it, I think the goal was to try and keep it under 2%. So that's one faction. So that unlocks a whole bunch of opportunities. It means now if you have an idea that is going to, at the end of the day, help reduce the carbon emissions that are affecting the ozone layer, etc., or any sort of greenhouse gas emissions, then it now falls under climate mitigation. Hence why you have all these renewable energy opportunities coming in, because yes, on the one hand, it's lowering the energy costs, but really and truly, those projects are designed to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. Now, for us in the region, it's not really about greenhouse gases. We hardly even make a dent, not even a 2-3% contribution of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We're green already. But our energy costs are high because we're using all this fuel generation. We don't have our own. So it kind of makes sense in a way to go renewable and apply these type of technologies in order to reduce our costs for our livelihoods. But does that really address the pain point for the region? As in, if we really want to be an honest conversation, does renewable energies and those things really address the regional needs? It doesn't. What it does is when we are implementing these things, it sends a signal to the rest of the world that, listen, if we can do it, you can do it. You damage the atmosphere, so you need to do what you need to do to reduce the temperatures. So it acts as a, you can say, advocacy tool. The other dimension is for us, and it's real. Climate change is here. It's going to probably take years to reverse, if so much. You're not going to sit and keep your hands closed. What you need to do is to try and adapt to this new reality. The reality now, and I'm being honest, we talk about Category 5 hurricanes. You do know the last set of hurricanes were more than a Cat 5, but we have no classification for it. So that's our new norm. The new normal it's getting worse. It's affecting everything. It's affecting food security because now traditional indigenous farmers who've always had open field farming are finding out that they're having pest issues. You know, the other day I was looking at the coconut tree. I poured water in it and it was literally boiling. Summer was so hot, right? So these issues are the key ones. How do we adapt to the new normal? But how do we make ourselves resilient? Hence why you have opportunities around resilience. Coming back to tech and back to the linkages. Data. In order for you to move and implement any type of transformation project, you need information to tell you exactly what's happening now, what changes you need to make, and how you move forward. At the end of the day, it's data. Where's the information? Where's the data coming from? If we have a poor data governance regime and data management regime, how are we going to implement climate action? Hence why when we talk about climate finance, and there's opportunities now, because of this whole conundrum, you have countries that would have pledged into funds so we can unlock capital. How are you unlocking climate finance? You need pipeline of projects and programs to say it, but no one's going to give you money unless you can justify it. It's not about, oh, I feel the weather is kind of hot. Have you actually measured it? What gets measured gets funded, right? So you need to make a case. So hence, there is a linkage right there. There's a linkage also at a very granular level on the data when we're looking at data. Apart from data for unlocking climate finance, you need data to know exactly what is happening, what's the observation, right? The reason why a lot of climate finance goes to climate mitigation projects, because it's energy. You slap on a smart meter, it monitors the data, you can easily now put everything in a spreadsheet and you can see over 2 years, this is what the kilowatt has been, and this is how much the carbon emissions has been. So therefore, you can easily quantify everything and it's easy to drive finance to it. What gets measured gets funded. So with adaptation and resilience, it's like going back into developmental economics, where we're dealing with developmental issues. Not one project is the same. But as a tech person and tech entrepreneur, it means you can unlock new opportunities that are actually generating impact to improve a person's life. So when we think resilience, you got to think out of the box. So we have to adapt to a new reality. Do you have an innovation that helps us adapt to this new reality? Something to protect us. So when we're thinking about that, we now think about what is it going to take to make us more resilient? And this is where huge opportunities come in. And it could be resilience on even the fact that, and I'll give the example of COVID again. COVID locked everybody down. It decimated most industries, apart from agriculture, though, to some extent for those who are able to go out and farm. Tourism, that's our main bread and butter. We had no tourists. So that reality is that now you can unlock new experiences, right? Enhance efficiencies and create new tourism products when you do have all these new data points coming in. It's very key. You can do virtualization. Now here in comes the metaverse, where people who were in lockdown could have experience, and people were actually paying for these type of unique personalized experiences, right? So when you have risks and you have challenges, it does also unlock these opportunities. And unfortunately, I think, again, we have all this siloed vision. We don't necessarily see the opportunity. And hence, impact innovation is important. Because, for example, back to agriculture, what stops you as a tech person in designing something for AgTech to help improve yields? Because they need help to measure soil. I did a session under Helen's daughter the other day, and the lady was telling me, one of my students said she spent 50,000 EC in preparing her land and everything. And we know Simonson had a volcanic eruption 2 years ago. No one does soil testing. So all her crops, and she did root crops, she said after how many months she went in there, and they're all so small, and it was happening all around the area. Now, if there were automated soil testers you could test in there to get the data, she would have known this particular plot would not work and saved herself the money. But who's going to give her back that money? So there are many ways of unlocking opportunities, and it is actually embedded. And I think more and more so, people in the climate action space and climate finance space are now recognizing they need pipeline of projects. They need a number of things to help climate action, but the ecosystem, they haven't brought in the other ecosystem players. Because you cannot expect a farmer who's not in tech to implement tech. There has to be partnerships happening, right? In disaster management now, even in disaster management, back in the day, you needed to have maybe 30, 40 people doing weather and doing predictions. Now they have AI. So you can actually have a disaster office or a Met office with 2 or 3 people working, because they're now leveraging on the data they're collecting to do more predictive thing. And this is very important for early warning systems.
Yes, Telly, so true. I mean, even when you're talking about the, climate and environment, it reminded me of a situation that happened recently in Jamaica, where I think there were 2 incidents of fish washing up on shore, hundreds, thousands of fishes washing up on the shore. And I think there was a recognition that, some sort of effluent from some place, got into the sea. And you say, but again, if there were sensors, one would begin to get a sense as to, pollution levels, and thus certainly help us to be more aware of some of these things that are happening in our environment, which could result, of course, in, the death of thousands of fishes, but fishes now that you can't even use. And just help us to just become a little bit more aware. And as you say, the whole issue of mitigation, because here it is that these are man-made problems. We are causing these problems and having that sort of impact on the environment. So it's really something I think that we definitely need to look at a little bit more. But you also, in terms of when you're talking about agriculture, there are a number of problems, for example, in that sector. And tech probably sitting down there waiting for problems to solve. And it's like, how do we get them together to know what these problems are, and that probably tech can help?
Yeah, it's true. Because you sit down there and unless you're involved, understanding, and this is where I say that whole methodology of actual innovation, practicing innovation, practicing design thinking, understanding product design. It's very fundamental, and this is where our tech in our region suffer, because they're great at building things, but they're building things for who? They're repeating we're not learning any lessons from what has happened to our region in the old times, right? It seems like we're getting more educated, but we're losing indigenous knowledge without looking at certain patterns. It's happened in agriculture, okay? Let's start from our region and the whole plantocracy approach. They went into sugar and cotton. The rest of the world started planting sugar and cotton. We have challenges with economics of scale. So a lot of them went out of sugar and cotton and went into retail distributive trades. And we acquired the same plantocracy agriculture system where we're just building product. Who's the market? We haven't defined the market. It's not been, what's the word? It's more a commodity. We're still operating on a commodity level. Look at Africa. They've been exporting commodities for God knows how long, and not necessarily building capacities to do added value. So Ghana, exporting chocolate for God knows how many years, but they import the finished cocoa, they import the finished chocolates and so on, and they wonder what is going on. So I now see they're starting to put things in place so that they can have more value added. But they're doing the same thing in tech. No difference. Sitting down, designing something for yourself, but not for the target market you're designing for. So this is where the biggest issues, and hence why you have a lot of startups that fail, because that fundamental getting to understand the needs are not being addressed at all.
Yeah. But I guess, Telly, we probably need to bring this conversation to a close. So let's kind of go back now to impact innovation and deep tech. And probably, what might be some parting thoughts that you would like to leave with us? Because we have covered quite a bit, and it's all interrelated, because as much as it looked as if we were, of course, talking about climate tech, but it's a key area. It's an area that we can have significant impact. It is one where you leverage some of the latest technologies and various technologies. So the whole principle of convergence economics, to make it work, and even in agriculture as well. So, share with us any sort of thoughts. Maybe what might be some key things you might want us to take away, probably even the private sector, but also, policymakers as well.
Okay. So for the private sector, they need to perhaps take a look and seeing where opportunities lie. I think for the most part, at least in our space, we have a lot of traditional private sector, which for the most part, they've matured, they've been there. But we have a lot of small MSMEs who are trying to do a number of things, but they're not necessarily designing for scale. So we do need a new cadre of startups that are really more intentional and focused. And maybe they can start as SMEs, but more intentional on creating innovations and solutions that can scale. If as an individual startup, you might not necessarily have the tech skills, but it is possible for you to actually do an AgTech by partnering and finding other people with the skill sets in order to help you optimize. And the key thing is looking at the fundamentals. What are you trying to solve? What is that actual pain point you're trying to solve? What is that actual need you have that the particular technology will help optimize? And also educating yourself, because the technology in itself won't help unless you kind of educate yourself around the different risks and countermeasures and how to use it and how it's applied, and other type of education that's not necessarily technology. Like I said before, same with the convergence on the technologies. There's a convergence of skills holistically, and this is again why we have challenges, because when the industrial economy came, there was that school of thought where you have to do one thing and one thing good. Hence why you have all these specialities. A person is a specialist, an economist, a this, a that, agriculturist, and that's it. You needed that kind of division of labor. In this new 21st century digital and optimized digital revolution, should I say, you do need a multiple layers of skills. You can't do it alone, and if you can't get those skill sets, perhaps you can leverage even generative AI to give you some ideas to help fast track. But you do need to have a collective. Hence why AI is taking off so much. You do need that collective knowledge. So that's for the private sector. For the policymakers, there are challenges, obviously. And again, when we talk about access to finance, our policymakers are constrained. If the economy isn't doing so well, where are they getting the money to actually implement? So public sector budgets are highly constrained. So it does pose a big challenge. But then they can more effectively try and foster sort of partnerships with other stakeholders, leverage things like climate finance to even grow other sectors and not look at things in silos. You might have something climate finance, but you need to build resilience of your tourism industry. You need to build resilience in this sort of thing. So it's a matter of finding ways of kind of connecting the dots and actually providing those opportunities for startups as well. Sometimes these funds are kind of complicated, so you need to put in programs to educate and sensitize persons on where they can go to get these type of things. And lastly, real policy, a policy on implementing design is very key. Most of our regions have started recognizing the importance of the creator economy and importance of creativity, period. But how about streamlining that across and mainstreaming it across, where we're looking at design for problem solving? It's very, very key. And I think this is a policy that if you have an existing government, even new ones, should take on board, because it cuts across the board in terms of us unlocking our impact innovation gene, so to speak. Yeah, that's it. And for tech companies, listen, identify opportunities. Don't go it alone. See how you can partner with existing industries to better understand their needs. And sometimes it does take a long game where you have to do some hand holding for a while for you to be familiar. It's almost like a marriage where you have to be familiar with the needs. You're not going to get it in 2 months and 3 months, but it takes engagement, deep engagement, for you to really start unlocking what the core issue is and what single thing or single things that you can actually streamline and improve and address. And if you are going into the space of deep tech, this would definitely unlock additional opportunities, because you have to go deep into the deep elements. That's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Telly, for joining us and for sharing with us just some thoughts and having us, I think, to think about the impact of what we're doing, the impact of innovation, whether or not here it is, we are so excited and getting caught up in all of the popular trends and perhaps not necessarily thinking, very much about what is the impact, how is technology changing our lives, improving our lives, and having impact, not necessarily because I think technology can, improve your life. It can help you to be a little bit more productive. But what might be some fundamental areas? So, for example, food security that we all were vulnerable to, and certainly during the pandemic period in particular, and even now, and with climate issues and the challenges that we have. But again, so it's just about, I think, having us to think more deeply about technology, how we are leveraging technology, the impact that it is having and can have to change our lives and livelihoods and future generations. And I think at least certainly to start 2024, this really sets the bar quite high and hopefully helps us to become a little bit more aware and intentional about how we move forward in this world. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're so welcome. And I think my last thing is I just tell persons and even institutions, they have to be bold. It's time to transform the legacy. And you can only transform legacy, solutions or infrastructures if you use deep tech to do so. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. The music is from the composition The Last Word, Oui Ma Chérie by Andy Norell. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a 5-star review, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on social media at ICT Pulse, either on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.